Hello and welcome to episode 1 of a very shallow dive into musculoskeletal anatomy. Let's get started. When we take a look at anatomy, the first thing we want to see is its definition. When we take a look at it, it's how we organize our body into different segments to be studied by science. A kind of real-world example of this is subway systems. You look at the subway system as a whole, but there's independent lines that work together to move millions of people. This is kind of the same idea with anatomy. We can break it down into individual aspects to see how it works in order to move our body. When we take a look at the system, first thing we have to look at is what it's made up of. When we look at the system as a whole, everything in our body is connected by connective tissue. This connects our cartilage, our bones, our joints, connects our muscles, tendons, and ligaments to allow us to move around and live our daily lives. When we take a look at the role of the system, first, it protects our vital organs, it supports our body, and what we're going to look at in a little bit more in depth today, it allows motion. So this raises the question, why are some people better at motion than others? The first thing we're going to look at in our body responsible for motion are our joints and bones that fall under the study of anthropometrics. Anthropometrics is the study of the measurement of the human body. When we look at the bones in the body, male and female, we can break it up into different segments. First segment, we can just break it down into the top half of our body, or our sitting height. Second way we can break it down is just looking at upper leg length, or just our femur length. And the third way we can look at it is our knee height, or our shin length. So these three different measurements make up our whole body. But in short, not to go too far into anthropometrics, there's an entire field of science dedicated to the study of the measurement of the human body. So when we take a little bit deeper look into these anthropometrics, more specifically our bone lengths, and we take a look at the pelvis, to start, they're just general statements. This may not be true for every single person. Comparing the spines between males and females when looking at the side, we can see that the female spine has a greater lumbar curve in the body, pushing those hips forward and down. In combination with the lumbar flexion and the hips being pushed forward and down, this also pushes your upper legs slightly in front of you. And this is one of the first differences we see between male and female anatomy when looking at bone structure. When looking at the pelvis straight on between males and females, we can see females naturally have wider hips, forcing the femur heads out a little bit wider. Now, when looking at the attachment points between males and females, these wider hips actually create a larger angle for our femur to counteract and are able to support our body. When we take a look how this travels down to our knees, something referred to as the Q angle, which is the line of the femur relative to the line of the shin. When we take a look at the difference between males and females, males generally show a lower Q angle when compared to females. So this angle of the knee causes that kind of hip close feeling because the knees naturally come in more in females when compared to males. And also, this angle causes more strain on your MCL. That MCL, or medial cruciate ligament, supports the medial side of your knee. When we take a look how this affects our ankles, so the angle of the knee causes the ankle to roll in, and this may cause females to be more flat-footed, resulting in poorer ankle mobility. A couple things to note, the diagrams do show major differences between female and male pelvises, but in reality, these differences may be only millimeter differences in length and degrees. If we take a deeper dive looking at our ankles, two things we're going to look at is dorsiflexion and knee tracking. Dorsiflexion is the measurement of your knee tracking over your toe with your heel staying flat on the ground. Greater dorsiflexion is usually viewed as a good thing, and females usually show greater levels of this. When we take a look at knee tracking, we're looking at the person straight on, and we're seeing the different variations in lateral movement of the knee, especially in full ranges of motion. More specifically, we're talking about the patella. The patella should track within a specific range for proper function. When we take a look at this between males and females, females usually show greater deviation of this, which isn't so good in terms of knee health. But it's not a huge risk factor, and it relates more to Q angle and usually occurs in low flexion angle, or partial squats. So when we take a look in general of anthropometrics, specifically on our pelvis and our lower body, the forward lean of the pelvis doesn't allow the femur head to move freely in the socket. And with the larger Q angle, your knees are more prone to coming in, which is referred to as knee valgus when standing same feet width as a male of the same height, relative lower limb length. What this causes? Poorer mobility in the ankle, which in turn just makes squatting that much harder. This is why having your feet a little bit wider may naturally create an arch in your foot, and this arch in your foot will create more space between your knees. That way when you're squatting, when we look up the line, this is going to allow the head of the femur to move more freely in the socket. One thing to remember though, each joint has different ranges of motion that are different person to person. Some people have joints that naturally allow for greater ranges of motion compared to others. One example of this is when we look at ankle dorsiflexion. Some people have great dorsiflexion and some don't. This is just kind of an effect of the way the joint moves in each person's body and how we are different from one to another. However, range of motion can be manipulated, sort of, through stretching and recovery protocols, but that would be for another topic and for another day. In the meantime, let's take a look at another major difference between males and females in their anatomy. Connecting those bones, we have tendons, muscles, and ligaments, and these all do with flexibility. We can take a look at flexibility pre-puberty, and generally we're going to see no difference between males and females. When these males and females go through puberty, this is where the differences begin, and especially in post-puberty or adult life, we see major differences in the flexibility between males and females. When looking at these differences, we're actually looking at the makeup of our ligaments and tendons rather than looking at our muscle composition. When we take a look at these post-puberty years, we see that females naturally have more laxicity due to estrogen and progesterone, which we refer to as hormones. Along with bone structure, this does put females at a greater risk of ACL tears, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the effects of these hormones helps you gain mobility throughout your menstrual cycle when these levels are higher. Also, when we take a look back at pre-puberty mobility, the higher the mobility pre-puberty usually means higher post-puberty mobility if maintained regardless of biological sex. And there are some people that are hypermobile, and it can be both an advantage and a disadvantage. And hypermobility is people who are just really naturally flexible. Even though females are at a higher risk for ACL tears, this laxicity is a great thing when we talk about pregnancy though. Now, it may seem all bad. However, our bodies are puzzles. Each piece is slightly different and need to fit in a certain position. And when these pieces fit together perfectly, great athletes are created and developed. However, sometimes it feels like the pieces don't work together, but there are ways to work around these issues to create positive adaptations. In the end, when we take a look at the whole picture and we look at the differences in pelvic structure, there are differences between males and females that cause movement differences. Remember, though, we're not robots. It's okay if some of us move differently than others during squatting and compound movements, because at the end of the day, you only really need as much mobility as your sport requires of you. And if this means that you need a little bit of extra time to warm up and a little bit of extra time to cool down, that is fine. The end goal is that we move pain-free. So even though there is differences between male and female anatomy and they may affect the way we move, as long as we're achieving what we want at the end of the day in our exercise, it doesn't really matter how you get there. I hope you enjoyed episode 1 of a very shallow dive into musculoskeletal anatomy.